countries.
Okay, now the money in rugby in Europe seems to be polarising now in France and in England. The domestic leagues there are, you know, able to attract talent not just from their own nations but from around the world. To the extent that Johnny Sexton's going over to play
Yep.
in France very shortly. In a way, has the fact that fans in Wales don't get to see all of their local heroes all the time, and the fact that rugby has become more cosmopolitan within Europe actually made the Six Nations more important because here's a chance to celebrate your own country.
Well, it continues to be extremely important, but I'm not so sure your point is entirely valid insofar as there's still quite a lot of Englishmen playing in France as well. So it's not just about one country versus another. Clearly, you get spikes every so often, and we've got to be careful of that and cognizant of that. But you've also got to realise, for instance, in the Heineken Cup, for instance, 4 out of the last 5 seasons it's been won by not a French and not an English club. So the reality is it has been spread around a little bit. You will get occasions when, somebody who has a lot of money in a club and wishes to develop that club pours money in. But whether that's a long-term sustainable model is another matter altogether.
Okay. I have one other question which is on my list that I've been asked to ask you, and tell us about that pitch in Paris. Possibly one of the worst that people can remember seeing. Are there certain standards laid down by the Six Nations? Are there sanctions that you take when you get something like that?
The simple answer to that is there isn't. I mean, no union pitches up and tries to produce a bad pitch. So from that perspective, it was a one-off. I don't think I've ever seen that happen before. So we'll have to respond to that in due course, and we will. But I think we've got to be a little bit more fair to them and give them a chance to correct the situation.
Okay. Now, John, on the point of revenues, do you have a revenue figure which you talk about in public?
I'm afraid not.
No, that's what
I mean, the only thing I can say to you is overall, if you take all the revenue streams, some of which I clearly don't control, such as ticketing and so on, if you take them all put together, the turnover in the Six Nations wouldn't be too far away from the World Cup turnover.
Okay, and I think we've got that from your previous answer, so
that's about as close as I'm coming.
No, that's, I just thought it was worth going back. So just one more on that then. John, if we're having this conversation in 5 years' time, where do you expect the Six Nations to be as a rugby tournament and as an iconic sports event?
It'll be where it is today, as the number 1 annual rugby tournament in the world. Its popularity around the world is growing immensely. So, for instance, 3 years ago we had about 5,000 hours of television around the world. Last year it was 20,000. That's the kind of thing that'll really develop. I think the international markets for the Six Nations will continue to improve dramatically over the next couple of years, and I believe our social media platforms are also going to be very important in terms of its development going forward.
What are the biggest markets outside of the participating nations for television?
Well, surprise, surprise, obviously South Africa, New Zealand and Australia, but North America would be important as well, and there are a number of others around the world as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. I didn't ask the question very well. The point that I was trying to make about the cosmopolitan nature of the leagues, if the corollary for football is that apparently the Brazilian national team, whenever they play, is a massive support for them because the fans don't get to see them play as much in Brazil. So I'm not sure that I asked that, but I don't think it's terribly important anyway.
That's
so
all right.
Move on to the Lions.
Okay.
And if we can, and if this is at all, it won't be used at the same time.
Okay.
But so if it's at all repetitive, then please.
That's all right. Don't worry. That's fine.
Okay. The British Lions go to Australia later this year.
And Hong Kong.
Okay, I'm going to try and get out to the game in Hong Kong. That should be.